Technical session number 24. Printers, what are we going to do? What is so amazing about these devices that used to be used on a daily basis, but almost everybody in IT right now is really, really on board with the go paperless movement. And it's usually after this section that they get on board with that. But we're going to talk about it a little bit. You know, we're going to be comparing and contrasting some different types of printers. We're going to be talking about identifying common steps for installing them. We're going to be talking about some common pitfalls when installing printers. Usually it's a driver or something like that. And then some common problems that come up with and how to solve them. So, behavior skills and mindsets for this particular session we want to keep in mind. Communication. Because if we are communicating effectively, our teammates don't necessarily know what's going on. And if the computer can't communicate with the printer, all we get is gibberish. And if you see it prints garbage, it's always a driver. Also, personal responsibility. Big thing there is, if you say you're going to do something, you do it. Because your teams need to be able to depend on you.
Kelly, you said if you see it prints garbage, it's a driver?
Yeah, it's usually a driver. We'll get into it. Don't worry.
Okay. I'm just taking it early. You know what I'm saying?
I got you. This is just preview stuff.
Galen, I think you do have children, right?
Yes, I do, sir.
Have you ever had your children bring home papers that they had printed and it looks like a demon just ran its fingers across it?
Oh yeah, just last week.
Yeah, that's when the drivers are bad and nobody feels the need to go and do anything about it.
Yeah,
it just
a bunch of random symbols and stuff.
It's so bad.
Got it. Thanks, Adrian.
So, but we will talk about that. We will explain it a little bit. Here it says there are 4 major categories of printers. Unfortunately, they're forgetting at least the 5th, which happens to be 3D printers. Those are becoming more and more commonplace in people's homes and in enterprise settings. More so in enterprise settings at this point in time. But you do have a lot of hobbyists and things like that that are getting into that market and actually helping really develop that market. They're becoming really big in medical industry, metal fabrication, all kinds of stuff. It's a really, really exciting field that is kind of evolving right now. But the other 4 major categories that we're going to kind of talk about here are going to be impact printers, inkjet, thermal, and laser. Yes, Galen.
Yeah, you said that these are the 4, but the 5th one is called what again? I'm sorry, man.
No problem. 3D printers.
3D printers. Okay.
Yeah, that is our
Are we
5th category
about 3D printers?
Or from a very high level view. They don't really get into a lot of detail with them, but you just kind of have to have an idea. There's 3 different types, so you need to be aware of that. And then some of the components that are involved with 3D printers. So if somebody mentions a particular type of component, they say the extruder in my printer is broken. If you hear the word extruder, you automatically know that's a 3D printer, and you're not going to assume you're dealing with an inkjet.
So that's going to be on the exam later?
They may ask about it, yes.
Okay.
So this is something you may see on 1101 or 1102. They do love to ask about printers. So I've heard people get as few as 10. I've heard of people getting as high as like 20, 25 questions on printers. So yes, it is something we do need to be aware of. Did you have another question, Galen?
No, that's it.
All right.
Sorry.
No worries. Just want to make sure we got you. All right. So 5 major categories, printers. We do have multifunction devices and scanners and stuff that kind of fit in here a little bit. They don't really dwell on those that much. But multifunction, I think we'll talk about it here in a little bit. Multifunctions are kind of like all-in-ones, like your printer, scanner, fax machine, or something like that. Those are pretty commonplace, especially in small homes, small offices, or SOHO situations. Then you also have scanners, which it is a little more rare to see standalone scanners like the old type platter ones. You will see like they have little scanner bars that you see business people will scan receipts and stuff like that in. So even that market has evolved pretty heavily over the last couple years or so. First, They like to start with the oldest, the impact printer. This one's pretty easy to kind of keep in mind. The name impact, it's making contact with the paper. So there's two main types of impact printer that you'll come across. But in both cases, physical contact is being made with the paper. You know, it's a form of impact. It uses an ink ribbon. It's usually like a silk ribbon or something like that that has been soaked in ink. And as the hammer or pistons make contact with that ink, it's basically driving through and making an impression on the actual paper itself, kind of like an old typewriter. So the two types that you will typically see is, one is called a daisy wheel, and it looks like an open flower. So it has a bunch of little arms that are stuck out that have different letters on it, be it, you know, uppercase, lowercase, and some symbols, and a little piston will hit each arm and cause that arm to hit that ink ribbon and press that, make an impression upon the page with the letter or character, what have you. Then there are the most famous kind, which is the dot matrix, which if you've ever heard one printing, you never forget it. It's that as it's going back and forth across the page. It has a series of little pistons in there that will basically punch out the shape of the characters it's trying to form. It prints line by line, but similar to the daisy wheel. It's making impact with the ribbon and physical contact with the paper. There is an impact taking place. Any questions with regards to this? The one thing that I will tell you with regards to impact printers that you need to keep in mind, because they love to ask this question, impact printers are unique in the sense that you can print multi-part forms. So if you've ever gone to get an oil change on a car or a repair shop or something like that, and then you sign the top page, and then there's like 3 copies below it, like an orange and a yellow copy or whatever, and they tear out the top copy and hand it to you, that is a multi-part form. And when they run it through a printer, the impact printers, because they make physical contact, can transfer those images through carbon paper onto the other pages. So when they talk about multi-part forms, you should always associate that with an impact printer. I guarantee you, you will see a question on this. So this is a gimme. Granted, for the most part, people are moving away from this, but you still will see them in the wild. Places like auto repair, manufacturing, things like that, still like to use the dot matrix printers and stuff like that because they're more robust. They're able to function better in environments with high amounts of dust and debris. And, you know, they're a little bit simpler. They don't break down as much. And they're capable of doing these multi-part forms, which is great for things like bills of lading for shipping, manufacturing, repairs, things like that. Questions or comments on this? Do we already know more about printers than we ever wanted to?
Is the ink ribbon and the dot matrix are 2 different parts of the printer itself? Or are they
the pistons and the ink ribbon are I'm glad you asked about the parts. Let's get into the parts of the printer.
Jesus.
All right. So in the dot matrix, you have what's called the planted knob here, which allows you to kind of roll the paper up and down. You have the sheet guide that will drive the paper in. On things like a dot matrix, they have what's called a continual feed. You may have seen this or may not have, depending on your age, where the paper kind of stacks up like an accordion in the box, but it's all connected in a perforated sense. So it's connected end to end, and they have those little holes on the side of the paper that those holes will clip onto a track, and that track feeds the paper through continually. So you don't have to stop and reload the paper as often. You can do an entire ream of paper in one shot on a dot matrix, in theory. I've usually considered myself lucky if I can get 2 to 3 pieces of paper to go through without jamming. That's my experience with them. All right. Now, you have a carriage that goes back and forth and has what's called the print head assembly. And this is essentially a little box that has little pistons in it that shoot out in a matrix form. So it's a square, like a little grid. And then those pistons will fire to create the lines on the paper. Some of the stuff's pretty, self-explaining, power knob or power switch, things like that. They tend to have a dust cover on top of them, but that's basic for the dot matrix themselves. They're pretty simple machines, thankfully. And a lot of the troubles that you would deal with regards to a dot matrix printer comes down to replacing the ribbon or advancing the ribbon. That solves about 80% of them. The other ones, you might get a piston stuck, like so if a pin fires but doesn't retract, you'll have a line that goes all the way across the paper because it's not retracting, it's continually making contact. So that's one other issue, but we will talk about some of the common problems with inkjets as we move along. All right. We can move past dot matrix now. It's forever ingrained in our memory. We will never repress that memory. Now we can move into inkjet. Inkjet in the average home, up until very recently, and even still to a great degree, this is the most common printer in the average household. Some small businesses will utilize them if they do not do a lot of printing. The reason being, the inkjet printers are really cheap to get in. Have you ever seen those $20 printers? You go in, you pay 20 bucks and you buy it, you think it's an awesome deal. And then you're able to print 5 sheets of paper, and then you got to go buy ink. And then the ink costs like $80 for a cartridge. That's not just them being mean. I mean, there is a little bit of that to it, but for the most part, the vast majority of the technology involved in an inkjet printer is in that cartridge. That's why the cartridges are so expensive. On the printer, the inkjet printer, they put all the ink cartridges onto essentially a carriage, and that carriage kind of rockets back and forth across the page, spraying ink on the page, eventually creating the image that you need, be it a photograph, be it a document, what have you. Their quality is measured in what's called DPI, or dots per inch. So the more dots per inch, the more crisp an image, not too dissimilar from a TV. What qualifies as a HD versus Ultra HD, it's the amount of dots per inch you can achieve. Or in the TV's case, it would be the amount of pixels. So also, the print resolution, so we said measured in dots per inch, and the speed of it is measured in ppm, which is also considered to be pages per minute. Now, the inkjet and the impact printer receive their instructions from the computer line by line. So quite literally, the computer is feeding directions to the printer one line at a time. And that's how it constructs the image. So whenever you send it, it breaks it down into 1,000 different lines, feeds that to the printer line by line, and then the printer is able to construct the image from that. Some of the more recent printers have what's called a duplex assembly, and all duplex means is it can print on both sides of the paper. So some of them do that, feeding it once and then feeding it back through, and it saves in paper, but unfortunately you're still using the same amount of ink. But that is considered duplex with regards to settings. Reasonably fast printing, relatively good quality images. It's very low cost for entry, but over time can become significantly more expensive if you're printing a lot. So you would need to take into account how much you're printing, whether or not you want to get into something like this. Like we print maybe 15 documents a year at our house, so an inkjet works just fine for us. You know, we replace the cartridge every couple of years. And thankfully, unlike, well, I mean, the dot matrix mostly did black and white, but they did have the color ribbons towards the end, but they never really worked that great. The inkjet printers are pretty good at producing either black and white images or full color images as well. And because Adriel asked, we're going to talk about the parts and maintenance of an inkjet printer. So impact maintenance. Oh, I put the slide in the wrong place. Oh, terrible me. I got to move my stuff around a little bit. Apologies. We already talked about a lot of this. Most of your maintenance goes to updating your printer ribbons and stuff like that, but we'll come back and talk about that a little bit later. Inkjet printer components, a little bit more complex than their impact printer counterparts, right? There's a few more things going on here. Here's the carriage we had talked about. It sits on what's called a stabilizer bar to make sure the track flows evenly across the page. It has a belt that controls exactly where that carriage is going to be across the track. Aptly named paper feed, usually on the back. There's a ribbon cable that leads to a control circuitry board, which is very new in conjunction to the dot matrix. And then we have the stepper motor, which is what controls the belt across the page. And then, as you can see, it feeds through. How does it spray the ink out? Kind of an interesting process, actually. So you have a tiny, tiny little nozzle inside that cartridge, and there are controller chips on those cartridges as well. But you have these tiny, tiny little nozzles, and you have to get the ink to come out in a controlled manner. So they actually have, essentially, in some of them, they have a little air bubble in there. And then they have a heating element that goes in to the nozzle. And what it does is it heats up that air bubble rapidly. And when it does, it expands inside the nozzle, forcing the ink to shoot out of that nozzle. One little dot at a time. And it's doing this hundreds, sometimes thousands of times per second. And it's doing it in conjunction with the other 2 to 3 cartridges on there, a lot of times, to create the multitude of colors that you would see normally. So here's another look at the printing process. This one is actually a little bit more of a high-end one. It has a multitude of ink cartridges in there. Normally, you would just see the black, yellow, blue, and cyan. So those tend to be the 4 colors that you normally would see in a printer. This one has a few more options, so it probably gets you a much bigger variety of color as well as depth of image. The Platen gap, that is the distance between the print head of the ink cartridge and the paper. So if it's too far, the image, like the dots, will become more dispersed. If it's too close, they won't blend together well. So you need to make sure that that is calibrated properly. Usually the machine does this automatically, but you can run it through a calibration phase in order to do this. It's always the magenta.
And you said it's the distance between
the ink cartridge nozzle, the print nozzle, and the paper. That's the Platen gap. And here's the problem, like in impacts as well as inkjet, if it's closer on one side than the other, your image can become blurred or smeared or lighter as you go across. So it'll be crisp on one side and light or blurred on the other. And that is because the gap has changed between the 2 sides. So one is set further back than the other. Questions on this?
I have something to say. Did anyone take a screenshot of the previous slide? Okay. Okay, it's good to take a shot of this because it's talking about all the parts and how they work together. It'll be helpful.
All right, give that another second or two on that one. Right. All good? Hearts and minds are clear? Okay. Maintenance. So you want to make sure like your paper is stored in a relatively dry place because humidity actually can have a big effect on your printers. If you have high humidity, the pages stick together more. And if the pickup roller is trying to grab a single page, it won't be able to actually feed more than one into the printer. I don't know if any of you actually experienced this. Two typical causes, if that's the case, it's usually high humidity or it's a worn out pickup roller. So the pickup part of the roller is not extending as far down as it used to. So it's grabbing more than one page at a time. Let's see here. Make sure you have it calibrated for the proper paper types. So anybody ever printed out resumes on those fancy thick pages? Have you ever done that? Did you ever have issues trying to feed it through a printer?
I did it, but it wasn't on my personal one.
So if you normally use like normal paper and then you switch over to that kind of paper, it's a heavier weight. So that's the thickness of paper is gauged in what they call weight. And you need to make sure a lot of the printers are calibrated to the correct type of paper you use. So if you're typically printing out things like invitations or cards or something like that, where you have a thicker weight, the paper or the printer is going to be set for this. This is a little more important with thermal printing than with inkjets, but the principle still stands. And then you go back to say a standard office type printer weight or paper weight, it's going to pick up 4 or 5 sheets at a time and shove it through the printer because the calibration for the pickup roller is going to have adjusted essentially for the heavier weight paper. So all it really needs to do to fix this is just a recalibration of the printer itself. Yes, Artez.
I was saying I kind of have that problem too when I'm using my silhouette printer. So if I use different types of vinyls, you have to go in and recalibrate it for the thickness or the type of vinyl that you're using.
That is a perfect example. I like that. So yeah, similar principle, depending on the quality and type of vinyl or paper you're using, it's going to determine your calibration for your printers itself. Printer head cleaning on a an inkjet. Off the side, typically over here, there's a little sponge, little wet sponge that's actually inside that inkjet. And what happens is on occasion, it'll go over there and it'll push the print heads up against the sponge and rub it back and forth to get any smeared, dried, clumpy ink or what have you off the print heads to clear them out so that they'll be able to print clearly. If your images are not coming out good, the colors are kind of not blending properly, you might want to run it through a cleaning cycle and it'll go ahead and clean up those print heads. As a standard for basic maintenance, you could go in, remoisten that sponge. In some maintenance kits, you'll get new sponges in there that you can just swap them out. But if there's long durations of time in between when you use the printer, and like if you take a long time without using the printer, then you use it again, you're probably gonna have to run it through a cleaning cycle. Or if you have a day of really heavy printing, it can kind of goop up a little bit on the printer heads and it may need to be cleaned at the end of the day. So
Are we just using like regular water for this?
no, well, they have a sponge and then you can remoisten it with water. I think a lot of times, like, they tell you inside the instructions for the printer what you need to use for that. Sometimes they use like a solution, like I don't want to say nail polish remover, but some type of chemical that'll break down the ink a little bit easier. So when you get the maintenance kit, it'll be sealed in a little sealed bag or whatever, and you pull it out and you just reinsert it and you're fine. But remoistening it, they may have a solution that you can buy and re-wet the sponge. And it may not take a lot, just like a few drops or whatever, just to get it wet enough to where to be able to clean the ink off the print head. All right, so ink cartridges. Here's the thing with inkjet printers. Most of the troubleshooting with inkjet printers basically comes down to replacing the cartridge. Most of the technology is in the cartridge. That's not always going to be the case. A lot of the time it is, unfortunately. So you have to replace the ink cartridges, and typically a lot of the problems you have go away. Here's a big caveat. This is where we're going to deviate real life from the test. The test is going to tell you, do not ever refill your cartridges. Do not ever buy refurbished or refilled cartridges unless you buy it from the manufacturer. That is CompTIA's rules. Why they say this is because of the ink viscosity, the thickness of the ink. The printer you have is calibrated to a specific thickness of the ink. And if you're just buying some other company's ink and putting it in there, it'll either be too thin and your image will be runny, or too much ink will be put on the page, causing it to smear, or it'll be too thick and it won't eject from the printer head properly. Now, real life, people tend to refill them because it's 1/10 of the cost of an actual cartridge. Do what works for you and your business. However, for the purposes of the 1100, never buy refurbished or refilled cartridges. All right, questions so far? All right. Thermal printers. If you work in any kind of shipping or receiving, these are the printers you're most likely going to work with. Retail should be familiar with them as well, because most receipt printers are a type of thermal printer. They use heat to create an image on that paper. Anybody ever get a receipt from a vendor, like a store or something like that, and then keep it in your car in the middle of summer? What happens?
Disappears.
Disappears. So that is partially because it is a special type of paper and it's using thermal printers. And so when you apply a heavy amount of heat, it erases the image. And unfortunately, it does it over time too. So if you buy like an expensive item from a store, and they're like, yeah, please hold on to your receipt for, the next 5 years in case you have a maintenance problem. And then you go back a year later and the receipt is completely blank. The images fade over time with thermal printers.
You just cracked the matrix, bro. That's the biggest scam, man. What in the world is that? Like, oh, how you gonna... Wow.
So the deal is you make a Xerox copy, or you go and you make a copy of the receipt and you keep the copy. So it's an extra step for you, but financially it kind of protects yourself, especially for expensive items like computers or something like that, where you have to hold on to that receipt for a long period of time due to warranty issues. So always bear that in mind. So you have two different types of thermal printers. We've just been talking about the first one, which is the direct thermal printer, which burns dots, dots into a special coated thermal paper. And this is typically what's used in receipt printers. Very easy to maintain. Usually it's just wiping them out with a cloth to dry them off. They tend to last a very long time, and they're extremely fast in printing. So very efficient for things like retail, with the exception of like long-term storage. Relatively simple machines to take care of. Next, you have what's called thermal transfer printer, which uses a ribbon in it, kind of like an imprint printer or something like that. And that ribbon has wax-based ink on the ribbon. And then the heating element melts that ribbon and helps melt the wax onto that thermal paper. and it's used to print things like barcodes, shipping labels, clothing labels, container labels, things like that. They have a lot more storing power than their direct thermal printer counterparts. They're relatively easy to maintain, a little more costly to run because of the wax-based ink, but still extremely fast printers. They can print out hundreds of shipping labels in a matter of seconds. It's absolutely amazing how quickly they print. And again, easy to maintain, still less expensive than trying to run an inkjet or something like that, but more expensive than the direct thermals. Questions on this? Have I put anybody to sleep yet? I'm going to take the silence as a yes. All right. If you want to have an idea as to the thermal printing components, you have that wax-based ink ribbon like we were talking about here. There's a thermal element, and it prints directly onto the sheet below. I believe this is the thermal element from another angle. Has a binder, kind of keeps everything into place. Base paper to help transfer that image, and then the thermal element, which heats the whole thing up for us. So that is thermal printers. Pretty quick and easy on that. The two mechanical things that may go wrong is the feed assembly and the heating element. But that is extremely rare, does happen. The paper itself, we already talked about that, has heat sensitivity. So if you put it into a hot car or apartment or something like that, the image fades and disappears over time. You just got to make sure you're using the correct paper, regularly clean it out for dust and debris. And for the most part, that's it. They pretty well maintain themselves. They're pretty easy to deal with. Questions on thermal printers? All right, now we get to the most exciting of all of them. And that is the laser printer itself. So laser printer, one of the more expensive ones, produces very high quality images, high speed printing, text and graphics. You can do black and white and color. Uses a process called electrophotographic imaging. This does not use ink of any kind. It uses toner, which are essentially look like powdered plastic. The black color is carbonized as well, like a polyester resin is what it is. So if you ever hear the word toner, instantly your mind should go to laser printer, nothing else. It's the only thing that uses toner. And if they're saying ink, inkjet. Ribbon could be either a thermal or an impact. But typically when they mention ribbon, they're talking about impact. Like if they say ink ribbon, that's impact. So you have to kind of keep your ear open for certain components, because they may tell you there's a problem with the printer and they'll mention a specific component, but they won't tell you what type of printer it is. You'll have to be able to key into what they're saying as to what type of printer you're dealing with. So again, toner, laser printer, ink, inkjet, ribbon, almost always is that a impact printer, but they will usually say ink ribbon to specify it and let you know that that's what it is. The LaserJet, non-impact, and it precisely places toner onto the paper. These printers can range from personal ones that cost maybe a couple $100s all the way up to real heavy duty industrial ones that cost tens of thousands of dollars and do all sorts of multifunction things. Like they will actually go ahead and bind, laminate, and staple together presentations and books and all that stuff for you, so you don't even have to do it. So You can go from relatively inexpensive to extremely expensive just in this one family. They're more expensive than their inkjet counterparts. But over time, they become less expensive because the toner is significantly more efficient and less expensive per page than ink. So if you have a small home or office and you do a lot of printing at the house, it's more beneficial to invest a little bit more upfront and get the inkjet, or excuse me, the laser printer. If you don't print a lot, then the inkjet would suffice. So if you're making a recommendation, or if you're thinking about something for your own small business, those would be some of the key things you would ask. Color printing, it essentially goes through the exact same process, but it'll do it 3 or 4 times. One's for black, one's for cyan, one's for magenta, one's for yellow. We haven't gotten to 3D printers yet, Ebo, but we will. So most commonly though, black and white used for printing documentation. And they use that polyester resin. So main components on the laser printer, obviously there's the laser. So the laser is stationary. It etches the image onto a photoreceptive drum with using a mirror to help etch that image into the page itself. There's the paper transport, which moves it through the system. Logic circuits, they operate very much like a computer. They have their own memory, their own RAM, their own processors. Many of them have their own user interfaces. They have the toners and the cartridges, which actually has a lot of the technology involved in it. And then you have the primary and transfer coronas, which help apply a charge to both the paper and or the drum. And then you have the fusers, which help melt things together to make sure that that toner does, permanently adheres to that paper. Then you have things like the erasure lamp, which is a really bright light that erases the image of the previous document that rolled through there so that the image or the drum is fresh and ready to receive a new image. And I know exactly what you're thinking. Oh man, this sounds exciting. Can somebody please tell me how this happens? Can we go through step by step and in detail know how this engineering marvel works? Well, you're in luck. We get to do that. There's a 7-step process with regards to laser printing. Yes, we need to know all 7 steps. We need to know what they do. You will be asked about this. They love asking about the 7 steps of laser printing. And it's a lot of situations like, after the printer does this, what comes next? But don't worry, we have a fun mnemonic. We actually have 2. One PG rated, one R rated, depending on, who you are and what you want to remember. Unfortunately, and I think I've only had one person ever remember the PG one. Everybody always remembers the R rated one. I don't know why. All right, so step 1, processing the image. One of the easiest things to remember, this is the printer receiving the image itself from the computer, getting the instructions. Unlike inkjets and impact printers, which receive instructions line by line, the laser printer receives instructions page by page. So it gets a full page description, and then it moves on to the next page and then the next page. So it receives all the instructions page by page as opposed to line by line. Once it receives those instructions, it creates a bitmap of that final image so it knows exactly what it's constructing. Step 2, we've got the image. What do we do with it now? So once we have the image, we have to charge the corona to make the drum receptive to a new image. So what it does is this charging corona creates a roughly -600 to 1000 volt charge uniformly across the entire drum. So that is the charging aspect. So it's processing, then charging.
One
Sorry,
more
what was
time,
that?
Kelly. One more time. The last thing you just said.
The charging corona has to apply a charge to the drum, the photosensitive drum, a universal charge of between -600 to -1000 volts across the entire drum to make the drum receptive to receiving an image. So it's been erased by the lamp. The next thing we do, because it's basically neutral now, we have to put a universal negative charge across the entire corona or the entire drum. So that is the charging. So we now have processing, then charging. What was that?
And that's the preparing the drum with negative electrostatic. Is it electrostatic? Yeah.
So we have a negative 6,000 to 1,000 volt charge on the drum. Once that is in place, we now have to expose the drum to the image that we want to put on the paper. So now what happens is the laser etches an image onto that drum. So it's going to be drawing the image that the page is eventually going to look like on the drum. And as the light hits the drum, it drops that -600 to -1000 volt charge down to about -100 volts. So it creates a pretty drastic difference in voltage. So that's the exposing process. Wherever that laser hits, it's lowering the voltage charge of that spot. So essentially etching that image into the drum. So that's exposing. So we now have processing, charging, exposing. Next, we need to develop. So as that drum is now rotating, it passes near the toner. And the lesser negatively charged sections of the drum actually electrostatically attract the toner to stick to those sections of the drum. So we're developing the image onto the drum. We've lowered the charge for those sections. We're now, the passing by the toner. The toner is attracted to those sections with the lower charge, creating that an inverse of that image on the drum. Well, now that we have it on the drum, we need to transfer that image to the paper. Excuse me. In order to be able to transfer it to the paper, there is the transfer corona adds a charge to the actual paper. So it creates a positive 600 volt charge on the paper itself before it also passes under the drum as the drum is rolling. And as the toner is attracted to the more positively charged particles, it will pull all the toner particles from the drum onto the page. So electrostatically, all that toner is now sticking to the page. So we have the image on there, but the only thing that's really holding it on there is like a static charge. So we've transferred it. Now we got to make it permanent. So in order to make it permanent, the paper with the toner sitting on top of it now goes between two rollers that are heated up. It's called the fusing process. So these two rollers are hot, and then they press the toner down into the page, making it so the image is essentially cooked in, and it becomes a permanent image in the page. If you've ever grabbed a piece of paper after it came out of a laser printer and it was hot to the touch, that was why it was going through the fuser assembly. So the page gets spit out, but we have one more thing we got to do, because we got to make sure that this toner or the printer is ready for the next page. So we have the cleaning process. The cleaning process is you have the erasure lamp, puts a bright light across the top of that photosensitive drum, erasing the previous image. And then there's a rubber blade that also sticks to the roller, and it scrapes off any residual toner that didn't get pulled off and attached to the page. So that's the entire process of the page moving through a laser printer. So the 7 steps: you have your processing, charging, exposing, exposing, developing, transferring, fusing, and cleaning. I know I said the same thing, George. I actually was fascinated by this from an engineering perspective, you know, how somebody put this together. I thought it was actually kind of interesting myself. I was the only person in my class that found it interesting, but I found it interesting nonetheless. So how am I going to remember these 7 steps for my test and all that kind of fun stuff, the order they go in? Well, there's 2 mnemonics you can use. The first one is please come every day to feel complete. It's very nice. It's PG. I'll even type it in chat. And I'm not even typing in chat, so because my cursor is not on the right thing.
Kelly, I watch Family Guy. Everything PG is still R. They still.
Well, if you go back to the 80s, it really is.
Yeah.
if you watch PG movies from the 80s, like, whoa, that was PG? Okay.
Wow.
All right. So the 7 steps. Please come every day to feel complete. That's the one that nobody ever remembers.
Brianna, you ain't have to do me like that. All right. I just got so
All
many
right.
flashbacks to elementary, middle school. Oh my God. Whoa.
Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. That's funny.
It's the
So-
same vibe.
Yeah, you create mnemonics in order to remember the order of things. Roy G. Biv to know the colors of a rainbow, you know, things like that. So we do
mail to
have some
people.
mnemonics to help remember these things. So please come every day to feel complete. That's the one some people like, but the vast majority of people like the R-rated version, which is printers can't even do the effing cleaning. So that's the one everybody seems to remember. Although we did have somebody create a new one last class, which was please come every day to effing class. But so whichever one you want to use, that's fine. No judgment here. It just helps remember the order in which things happen. And you do need to just kind of, to a degree, understand a little bit of what happens on each step. The easiest ones, because you have 2 C's. The first thing you do is processing an image. The last thing you do is cleaning up. So the first 2 should instantly, you know, let you know what they are. And then you kind of just figure out the order in the middle. So there's your 2 mnemonics for that. We do have a couple more mnemonics throughout the class for certain things, just to kind of help you remember certain things. Any questions
please-
so far? What was that?
Please don't throw sausage pizzas away when you get to network.
That is the OSI layers. Yep, 7 steps of the OSI layer. Please do not throw sausage pizza away. But unfortunately, we got the 5-layer model now because of Google, and it's please do not throw away. So it's just 5 steps now. And then there's a 4-layer DOD. We'll get into that next week. You'll all love it. All right. Any questions with the 7 steps to laser printing? No? We're all experts on printing? This is awesome. I'm going to love this because we won't have to review printers after they take their first mock exam. They'll just be like, yes, I got this. All right. Here's just another way of looking at it with some of the components. It does a little bit more of a concise explanation of each step. You're processing, charging, exposing, developing. If you want to take a screenshot of this, we'll wait here for a second. It also lists out some of the nice components and what it is they do. We'll give it a brief second here. Yeah, but Artez, They did have the mnemonic for the planets, but we had to completely change it now that they were mean to Pluto.
There was a
Man,
Drake and Josh episode about the planets, so that's how I remembered.
I
There was
love the. Go ahead.
what did you know, Kelly?
No, I loved it. Like there was like a T-shirt that I saw somebody wearing, and it shows like all the planets, like for a family photo, and like Pluto's off to the side, all sad. So they're all sitting getting a picture together.
I have a question for you, Kelly. Like, how likely someone would actually come in and fix this? Like, if a laser printer breaks, let's say it's like $80, $60 printer.
Well, laser printers aren't typically going to be $60. Now, there's certain things that you can fix on laser printers, and there's certain things that are what are called field replaceable units, much like computers. And there's certain things that we would not mess with.
Exactly.
We would call in a technician to do this, but
Okay.
there are some basic maintenance things that we would take care of.
Okay.
So,
Because this
But under-
this is like, this is some next level stuff I'm looking at. So I'm like,
so we got to be sure that, you know, we at least understand how the process works. That way, if we see certain types of issues, we know where those issues are taking place.
okay, cool.
Ninja, for the most part, when you're dealing with printers, you're not really fixing them as much as you're just troubleshooting a driver issue. Or if something like a laser printer, it gets very hot, so you're gonna have to go in there and wait until it cools down, like plug
Yep.
everything out and make sure. And if you take all of that apart and realize that there was nothing really wrong with the printer, you wasted all your time when it was really just somebody trying to put way too many things through, you know, through feeding the data into the thing because the
Okay.
driver wasn't correct, stuff like that.
So is this one of those like ginormous printers?
No, it's
At
just
like FedEx and Kinko's? Is that what we're talking about?
that's the thermal printers. Laser printers are for more if you've ever seen, like if you've ever gone to a Comic-Con or something like that, those people that have their prints where the
Okay.
colors are really good and it's on special paper and stuff like that. Like Brianna's background was probably made with a laser printer.
I see. Cool.
Yeah. It's for really
So
crisp
thermal
graphics.
So thermal printers are like the thick client of printers, then you would say?
Thermal printers will do everything at a low level. No, because they're really fast though, right, Kelly? Aren't thermal printers fast?
Oh, extremely.
Yeah. Inkjet probably a thick client, bro.
Inkjet. Okay. All right, got it.
All right. Any questions?
What's the name of that large printer that they use for architects to print out blueprints on large paper?
Well, typically that is a type of laser printer, I thought.
They have a special name, I can't remember. That's laser printer?
I thought it was a type of laser printer. I could be wrong. So I'd have to look into that one. So I'm not familiar with that one, I would say. But I really know about laser printers because I had to study this stuff. So for the 7 steps, remember how I was talking about certain things I would come into class and write the stuff down on the board. I told you about the rate arrays where I would draw the rate arrays every day until I had it memorized. It only took a couple, like a minute or so in the morning, and then I would do it at lunchtime. So twice a day I would draw out the rate arrays, and then eventually I had it perfectly memorized. I did this as well with the 7 steps to laser printing. I would write out the steps real quick, and then I would quickly just give a brief description of what happened in each stage. Cleaning's pretty straightforward. You're cleaning the blade. There's a rubber blade that cleans the drum off, and then there's a light that wipes the image off. Simple. Processing, printer receives the image from the CPU or from the computer. Done. You know, just something that helps you remember what's happening. But yeah, I would write down these 7 steps, or I'd write out the mnemonic and then fill in what the 7 steps were. But just a way to practice it. Because
Repetition, right?
yep, repetition is the mother of learning. Absolutely. So hope everybody's got a screenshot of this one. Move on to the next one. Here we go. Last 3 steps: transferring, fusing, and cleaning. Duplexing basically just means, remember, what is duplexing again? It's printing on both sides, right? So printing on both sides of the page. So it goes through once, it gets spit back to the beginning and goes through again. Printing, it goes through basically on transfer belts and runs each type through each type of color. So you get the yellow, the magenta, the cyan, or whatever, the black. And so it runs through each, it does this entire process through each of those and then cooks it out. So I don't know, Artez, they basically said that it was somebody who just misidentified another Allosaurus. So that's what that was. And so they basically said it is no longer considered a dinosaur, which basically ruined all the Land Before Time movies, because Littlefoot was a brontosaurus.
Kiss teeth, that's weird.
All right, laser printer maintenance. Make sure you have it calibrated for the proper type of paper. You can have, in the larger laser printers, they can have different types of paper in each drum, or each printer will have multiple different types of paper loaded into it. You may have legal paper for the really long fun sheets. You may have standard office paper, which is the thinner one, and you may have thicker weight paper for important documents or marketing images and stuff like that as well. And so each one would be calibrated for the type of weight and type of paper you have. So when you're printing to the printer, you need to clarify what type of paper you're using so that the printer knows and can use the appropriate type. And then when reloading the paper, like if you're using the thicker weight paper in drawer 1, don't put standard office paper in there without recalibrating, because it'll pull through too much paper, because it's, you know, the heavier weight, it'll draw everything through it and you'll get jams pretty easily. And the bad thing about laser printers, when you get the first jam, there's usually a lot of jams that follow up, because when one gets jammed up, what's the first thing somebody does? They open it up and then they rip the paper out of it, not making sure they get all the paper. And if you leave just a tiny piece of paper left in that little laser printer, every page that follows is going to jam up. It's going to hit that piece of paper, and it's going to be just basically a roadblock, an accordion crush, all that paper. And then you'll be fixing jams constantly. The nice thing about laser printers is it tells you where it jammed. So it'll say jam behind door 1. You open up door 1, you'll see the paper all crushed up in there, and you can pull it out gently, try to get it all at once, and get it out. All right, toner cartridges. Sometimes you're running low on toner before the new toner comes out. Well, you can kind of, you can put it on economy mode and it'll use less toner. But the other thing you can do is kind of pull that toner cartridge out gently and lightly rock it side to side. Do not, and I repeat, do not shake. Do not shake the toner up and down. Otherwise, whatever outfit you're wearing at that point, you're pretty much just going to write off, because that toner is going to explode all over it and all over the floor around you. And
My fault.
trust me, but you're all right. You do not want to clean up toner. Trust me. They typically need specialized vacuums. If you try to wipe up toner, it just smears. So not fun stuff. So gently rocking it side to side to kind of break up some of the toner, put it back in. Do not shake the cartridge. A lot of issues, much like the inkjet in a laser printer, can be solved by replacing the toner cartridge as well. And a lot of manufacturers will give you a quote unquote discount for recycling the toner cartridges. Basically, you send it back to them, they refill it with toner, and then they reuse it. And then before you put a new one in, there is a fun little strip that's across the end of it. Kind of like when you have on electronic devices, when you first get them, they have that little protector and coated, the protective piece of plastic that covers the screen or whatever. Make sure you take that off before you put it in. Otherwise, it won't be able to function. Questions so far? Brain check. How are we feeling?
Nah,
Have
it
we
feels
gone?
good. It feels good.
Feels
Tired.
good? Tired?
It's just I guess I'm used to the troubleshooting of printers being software or
And there is a huge portion of it that will be that.
yeah,
But they want you to be able to handle other issues as well.
what is it,
My
like,
office, it was almost rarely software. It was almost always paper jams.
paper jams.
Yeah.
I mean, but never mind. No, that could happen a lot. I was thinking more about like changing cartridges and stuff like that. That's something.
Yeah, I mean,
that I had to
that
deal
was
with a lot.
a regular thing that happened. I mean, because we use a lot of paper in logistics, printing bills of lading and documentation that has to be stored for at least 5 years. So we always kept hard end software copies of everything. So we printed a ton. But yeah, paper jams were a regular thing, and that was usually when the paper would run out, somebody would overload the paper tray. Like, yeah, I can fit a whole ream of paper. You know, yeah, right. But they would jam in way too much paper when they were loading new paper into the printer because they didn't want to do it twice, and that would force jams as well. So it was usually misuse that caused a lot of our problems, Adrian.
Yeah, I'm starting to realize that printers seem to be able to do a lot of stuff on their own. That's why I'm starting to see, like, I don't understand how we're supposed to be getting called in to be fixing these things.
Well,
yes, it's customer service.
Yeah, and it's you know, ID 10T errors a lot of times, but we still have to take care of that.
It's starting to seem like that, yeah. Like Ninja,
You know?
it's like, how can this be so, like, how can it be so intricate? And we're supposed to be fixing this? It looks like it
So-
can handle itself.
A lot of things it can, and it does kind of guide you, but a lot of people don't want to read the screen. You know, they're just like, oh, it's not working. You know, and it tells you like, hey, paper jam door 1. So that's what we're here for.
If that keeps me in employed, you know,
That's what I'm saying. Think of it as job security. Yes, Ume.
Yeah, so I have a printer and based on your description, I couldn't determine which kind of printer it is.
So does it use ink, toner, or a ribbon?
It uses Wi-Fi. Other than that, I don't know anything.
So you've never had to refill a cartridge on it?
No.
If you open up the lid, you should be able to say, or on the top, it'll say inkjet or something like that.
Oh, it says everything on the outside. It has a Wi-Fi connection.
You can look up the serial number. It should be like on the bottom or the side of your printer. And
with the serial number, how do
Google
I
it.
understand what it says?
just copy it onto Google.
Google
and-
it. Yeah, you can do it. It's like an HP, you know, 4532, and it'll say, oh, it's an inkjet.
Yeah, it'll probably be next to like a barcode or something, and like be like a sticker, like a small sticker would have like information on it.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions?
very bad feeling that the next slide is about to be a quiz or something.
What? I would never do that, y'all. So when you're cleaning printers on the exterior of the printer, basically just dry cloth. Same thing with the interior, a lot of it. Dry cloth cleaning. Don't use harsh chemicals that can destroy the interior parts of the printers themselves. Laser printers, you have to, if you're cleaning up toner, there is toner safe cleaning. They actually have like magnetized brushes and stuff like that that will actually kind of pick up and attract the toner so that you're not just smearing it around, but you're actually able to clean it up. They also have they actually have toner specific vacuum cleaners that will suck up toner if you have a ton of it spilled. There is a picture of some poor person where you can see like a toner, basically a whole fresh toner cartridge exploded. And you can quite literally just see the outprints of the outline of the footprints of the person who was standing there.
Kelly,
You know,
isn't toner like dangerous?
well, it's a polycarbonate resin that's like the black toner has like uses carbon for the color, so it can be if you breathe it in.
Yeah,
But
I mean, it just blew up in somebody's face, and you're saying if they breathed it in, I'd be
well,
surprised if they
usually
didn't.
it doesn't blow up in their face, but it's like spilling out all over the place, and it's just a fine powder.
Ay, ay, ay.
So it's not usually like poof in a big toner cloud. It's literally just like kind of goes out and down, you know.
Listen, you get me scared to work, you know.
I kind of want to see that.
No, you don't. I don't.
I will see if I can find the picture.
I mean, it's not
of
explosives.
the
You'll
No,
be
no, no,
fine.
not like that. It's just more like I'm not trying to go home. It's just gonna be so rough to explain, brother. Like, come on. Imagine going on the train.
That's one of those. That's one of those
Hey,
you just
Kelly,
buy.
play it
You
super
buy
slow.
clothes on the way home and then just throw them away.
Play the video in super slow motion. It's gonna look satisfying.
Which one?
The toner spreading, like when it drops, how you said it drops and spreads.
Yeah.
Super slow motion, so we can relax.
It'll look like the Mark Rober video with the extra fine glitter bomb that he set off or whatever. It'll look just like that.
Exactly how I was
All right.
thinking about it.
All right. So replacing maintenance kit. Usually this will have some feed and transfer rollers, like the pickup rollers and stuff like that. Those may need to be replaced, or the rubber gaskets or grommets on those may need to be replaced. Laser printers, thankfully, have a maintenance page count. So like when you put in a maintenance kit, you basically reset the page counts like an oil change on a car. You know, you reset it for the mileage. Every so many pages, it'll say, hey, maintenance needs to be performed. If you stay on top of that, it usually works in pretty good order. Try to run through regular calibrations. You don't have to do this like every day, but maybe once a month, go through, recalibrate it, check for updated drivers and stuff like that, just to make sure everything is running smoothly. Another troubleshooting tip that comes up, which is kind of interesting, and it was really neat the way they figured out how to do this to make life a little bit easier. Repetitive smears on the page, because there's like 20 something rollers in a laser printer. There's a lot that it passes through and touches. So if you get a smear on a piece of paper, how do you know which roller is dirty? Do you want to go in there and go ripping out all 20 rollers? I wouldn't. I got other things to do with my day. And all you got to do is just wipe off that roller. So you don't want to sit there and go hunting for 20 different rollers. So if you got like a repetitive, you know, blotch on a piece of page, let's just imagine that each of these looks the same and they're the same distance apart. So you get like repetitive blotches on a piece of paper. Did any of you guys ever experience this? You know, when something comes out, it's like there was a dirty roller and you get this repetitive like smear on your paper, like every few inches or something like that. Well, the manufacturers, when they built this, they built all the rollers a different size. So quite literally, they on their manufacturer's website or in the manufacturing instructions, you measure the distance between the two smears and it'll say, oh yeah, that's roller 13. Couple extra seconds, you measure that, you know exactly which roller is wrong. You go in, open it up, clean it off, good to go. The downside is the fuser assemblies and stuff like that gets really hot. So like Adriel was saying, if ever you're going to work on a laser printer, you turn it off, unplug it, wait 30 minutes.
Longer than that, Kelly. Longer.
Well, that's the standard, they say, 30 minutes before you go reaching in there. Because that stuff, you know, it's hot, especially if you've been printing a ton of stuff. So yeah, unplug it, let it cool for 30 minutes, then you can perform maintenance on it.
It's a huge resistor, essentially. It's like a space heater, but it is worse.
And they actually use something in there, like you have the standard power supply for a computer. So you have the PSU, in a laser printer, they have what's called the HVPSU, which is the high voltage PSU. So it is much more powerful than a standard power supply. So we don't play around with those. If there's something with the HVPSU, that's when we call in a technician and say, hey, I'm not touching that. I value my life. Yes, Galen.
Is there a kind of glove, a type of glove that you can buy? Like a protector?
Like an oven mitt?
Nah, not like an oven. Like in construction, they have like these gloves that protect your hands.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure they do have them. But again, you're still going to want to wait about, they still recommend waiting about 30 minutes just because the glove may come to here and you may brush your arm against it, and you burn your arm. So you may want to just, give it the 30 minutes, shut it down. And what you can be doing is, while it's doing that, you can be looking up if there's any updated drivers that need to be installed or any other maintenance that needs to be done while you're in there, so you can multitask it if you need to.
Check tickets, like check your ticket, go back over the
Yeah.
ticket, and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or if it's like your first few times working on it, go look up forums and videos just to make sure you know how to take it apart and put it back together properly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Ellie,
So
I'm
better
starting
safe than
to
sorry.
see something.
What's
I'm
that?
starting to see something about the stuff that people don't like talking about in the class, or not necessarily the topics, but I'm starting to see a trend of when people have a certain outlook on something in the class, it's usually because the most annoying part of it has to deal with the user.
Yes.
Because I'm starting to see how everybody says, have you turned it on and turned it off? Like,
Mhm.
turn it off, turn it back on.
And the reason is because that is overwhelmingly the cause, is things like that.
So I'm starting to see like why we get a bad rep in terms of customer service, and it's because they keep us employed, but we don't necessarily like having to do the same things over and over again.
Mm-hmm. I mean, think before they automated password resets, some poor intern was quite literally hired, and his job interview for like 3 months to see if he might become or he or she may become an IT tech for that company was to sit there day in and day out, do nothing but reset passwords for months on end. That's all they did. And then at some point, somebody got so annoyed and then they scripted it. And they're just like, okay, here we go. We never have to do this again. But for a long period of time, that was the way it was. But, the bright side of that was it was an additional person that had a job. Not anymore. Automation. So.
I hear that people are going pretty excessive with the scripting, though, is that they'll have 2 jobs and that they'll just have like one kind of doing easy jobs for them, so that they can switch back and forth between jobs even quicker. Like it's getting crazy now.
Well, you create like macros and scripts and stuff like that to do the most mundane aspects of your job, and then you jump in for the more serious things. But absolutely. Especially like with the work from home, like if you could do 2 jobs simultaneously, they're paying you to complete a job. If you complete the job, then there you go.
Yeah, and some companies are like trying to catch on. They're like, well, you can't use our equipment for another company, so people will like make designated like monitors for that company only.
There is like machines they use that because they monitor mouse movement. If the mouse stops moving for X amount of time, then they know you're away from your computer, and then they'll clock you out or whatever. So they have like, I've seen people like take oscillating fans and zip tie it to their mouse so that the mouse keeps moving. They have like pads that will vibrate your mouse so that your mouse keeps moving. I mean, there's, it's basically, it's like the cybersecurity arms race, like for everything that the black hats find out to try to break into a system, the cybersecurity has to correct. And so it's just a constant game, I guess. Yes, Brianna.
How do I say this? When we get hired, right, and someone has an issue with their printer, what's a common thing they'll have us do? Is it more my printer won't connect to the Wi-Fi?
Well,
Or-
normally it's, I can't get my document to print. That's
Oh.
generally the response you're going to get is, my printer isn't working. I can't print any documents. And so
Oh,
you kind of have to go from there and try to figure out what's going on. Is anybody else in the office able to print? If you try to take this document to another printer and you try to print it, does it work? You know, so there's like certain things that we go, but that is the typical call for a printer is my printer, my documents won't print. You know, then
Okay,
you got to go in
so-
and you got to verify that they're hooked up to the correct printer. You know, there's like steps that you're going to take place. You know, is the printer attached to the network? Can we see the printer? Can we ping that printer and it respond? You know, but you know, we have to go through each of these individual steps and make sure. The biggest one is, are they hooked up to the correct printer? My boss actually did this. He went to a week-long meeting in Ohio with all the bigwigs and stuff like that. So he was up there for like a week, comes back down, had new manuals for us to go over. And he prints it, nothing happens. So he goes in, checks everything, prints it, nothing happens. And he does this like 3 or 4 times. This manual is like 300 pages. Then
my
finally,
God.
somebody in Ohio calls down screaming, saying, please stop printing to our printer. You're jamming up our printer, because he was hooked up to the network of the printer in Ohio. And the way that they named the printers in our company, you had no clue where it was located.
Oh, well, that's their first mistake.
Yeah,
They should
so like,
label it better.
yeah, you if you label the printer like HP, you know, M&R Group, 3rd floor, Jacksonville, then you know exactly which printer it is. But no, it would be like HP, then a string of 20 different numbers. And only they knew where they were located. We didn't know if it was the right one or not.
We
Yeah,
need
so
to
that's
come
on them.
together as a cohort and collectively nominate Rihanna to be a system admin. All right?
There we go.
Because I feel like she doesn't pull her punches. She will keep everybody in check. She'll make sure that if something is wrong, she'll say it to your face. You know,
Yep.
I respect it. Could not be me.
You gotta find a company that appreciates that. Yes, Hank. Hank, do you have a question?
I think his volume's really low or something.
Yeah, I can't. Of course, I can't hear him. All right, if you can hear me, Hank, can you please type it in chat and we will try to address it there, sir. All right, so laser printers. All right, and there was much rejoicing. We've now hit halfway mark on the printers slideshow. I know y'all are thrilled. The end is visible now. All right, 3D printers. Printing in a 3D printer is not called printing, it is called rendering. The main components we need to be aware of is you have the print bed, which is the flat surface at the bottom. So print bed and surface is the thing that they actually build the image on top of.
Can you hear me?
It's really, really broken, Hank. You may need to type in chat. Here we go. Okay, so most common issues, Hank, would be printer drivers.
Can you hear me?
So yeah, it'd be printer drivers, things like that. Spools getting, like the printer spool getting overloaded or locking up and you have to restart the printer spool, which is typically, you can access it on any computer. But those would be some of the most common things you experience. But we'll get into some of that more as we go. All right, so 3D printing is called rendering. 3D printer components, the ones we need to be aware of. We have the printer bed, which is the flat surface that the image is constructed upon, creating that 3D image. Mostly this is done in plastic or resin. For the plastic kind, the most common uses what's called a filament extruder, which you see like a little spool of plastic cabling or wire or whatever. and that will feed up and down through what is the extruder. That extruder will melt that plastic and layer it like tiny layer by tiny layer, creating a three-dimensional image or prototype for you. And then you have typically gears and motors that move that printer around so that it can precisely place the plastic down for you. And then fans to help it cool so that the plastic or resin will set properly. And then you can pop the image off of the table and voila, you have your rendered image. They do other things right now with the printers. They're getting into a lot of exciting things, like they actually do metal, which is the SLS printers, which is the selective laser sintering printers. This uses like a metal powder. So you could use things like titanium or aluminum or steel or what have you in powdered form, and then use a laser to melt it and layer it and build upon each section piece by piece. And they use this for prototyping and machine work and stuff like that. This is really speeding up the engineering process so you can go from concept to manufacturing very, very quickly. It allows smaller businesses to get into machining manufacturing at a much lower cost rather than having to set up huge workshops or manufacturing facilities. They can really get into this. CNC is a little bit different, Adriel, because CNC is more about removing material from a block versus the SLS, which is building material on top of each other. So, you know, I would say we're like SLS, and this is more like sculpting, and CNC is more like carving. So you would sculpt an image from clay and build it up versus carving from a block of wood or marble a statue. CNC is more of that carving aspect. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think Nassim was talking about the blueprints thing. That's probably the closest thing that I can think of. I remember when I was in architecture and they were talking about CNC machines and how you can use them to basically cut out signs.
Yes, they're amazing machines. I would personally love to have one.
And that's how.
But I can't justify it yet. Oh, so they have like a blue layer on top of the page and it carves it up.
How you would do it, because if you're making the blueprints in CAD, all you're really doing is putting that through a CNC machine, and that would be drawing it on the paper, and that's how you would give out the blueprints.
Okay, interesting.
Just to make sure that they're all like to scale, even if they're on bigger pieces of paper or smaller pieces of paper.
Okay. I did not know that.
I think I'm not too sure, but I think that's one way you can make a blueprint.
Well, I'm definitely going to look into it so I at least have that information in the back of my head. I'd never been asked about the blueprint printer, so that was a really good one. But all right, back to this real quick. So you have the SLS, which is the powdered metals or plastics, and they use a laser to melt it and create the layers, building out a whatever item you're trying to manufacture. You have the filament type, which is the most common one that you will see, especially for home use and small business, for prototyping, and that uses the filament wire that feeds down through the extruder and it melts on top of there. And then you have the resin or SLA, which is the stereolithography resin printers or SLA printers. They basically have a pool of liquid resin, and then they will use a UV light to create the layers, and then the actual printing surface raises up from the pool rather than the material being printed down onto the surface. So it's kind of in reverse order. It's really neat to watch it in stop motion. And, you know, a three-dimensional object being printed out of that. So those are your three basic types of 3D printer: filament type, stereolithograph, and then the selective laser sintering. Questions on this? You don't need to be an expert on 3D printing. You just need to have like an understanding of it from like a 10,000-foot view.
Kenny, have you heard of this company called Winsun from China?
What was that again?
Winsun. They use giant 3D printers to build houses, like 10 houses a day.
Oh, the concrete printing of the houses? Yeah, I have heard. I've seen that. That's pretty good. They look like the adobo houses. They're pretty neat that where they do those. Yes. Those are definitely really cool. There's also like they're also now starting to be able to print 3D print tissue, like living tissue. Because the goal would be to like 3D print organs and stuff like that. And interestingly, the big thing that they were waiting on was a 100-year-old patent from Xerox to expire, because the technology used in that would allow them to print what's like capillaries, which is how you get blood to the surface of your skin. And that was the main thing that was holding them up from being able to attempt to 3D print like kidneys or livers or hearts and stuff like that. And now they print kidney and liver strips for testing medications before they will even get to animal trials, because that's the biggest thing that knocks them out of FDA approval is liver and kidney damage. And so now they can figure that out really early in the process and eliminate those medications early, saving decades on the evolution of medications. You know, so we don't find out 10 years later that it's, you know, hurting people's kidneys and stuff like that. So there are some really exciting things happening. And then a lot of that is due to 3D printing in the medical field. And then if you could 3D print an organ, you don't have to worry about the graft versus host tissues, because it's from your own tissue. So exciting stuff. I actually enjoy reading about it a lot.
Cool.
Kelly,
All right. Yes.
do you think even 3D printing the organs, right? They're still going to charge an arm and a leg, or literally an arm and a leg. Oh my goodness. It's not going to be cheap though.
Well, not at first. No, nothing. No technology is cheap at first.
It should be, man.
It has to develop an economy of scale for the cost to come down. So
pretty-
yes, no tech, you know, but the thing is you don't have to go on wait list and wait for somebody else to, you know, have a car accident for you to get a heart.
That's what I was gonna say, Artez. It's like,
But
And if you have a rare, blood type, that could be years.
yeah, I was gonna say when it comes to organ donors and transplants, usually it's not necessarily the fact that the like a family or a person can't afford it. It's usually because they run out of time. And it's one of the saddest things that you really have to deal with when you work in the medical field.
Yes.
It breaks my heart every time I hear my family talk about it.
But that's why this is such an amazing technology on that front.
Feel
In
better,
theory,
bro. Be able to
Brianna.
order one, bro. Feel better. Don't feel bad anymore. You just order one from the store. You know what I'm saying? Have it sent.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I'll be in hospital room 311. You know what I'm saying? Send
No,
that
because
to
it's
the
really serious. You know, when
Got a
people
nice
have
little
very rare
catalog.
blood types, man. Nope. You
Yeah.
can't
So
find nobody.
it's still in the
Facts, okay.
theoretical stages. They believe they have the capabilities to do it. Right now, they're able to do things like 3D print skin grafts, and then they can print the liver and the kidney strips to see if, you know, medications will damage it. So they're working in that direction. But the main things they weren't able to do was like create capillaries within the tissue to allow blood to circulate. And now they're able to do stuff like that. So it's a huge step closer to that. And that was like 5 years ago that they were able to do that. So any case, sorry for going off on the weeds. I do that sometimes. I apologize, especially if it's something that I find interesting. All right. Scanner configurations. We talked about this briefly. Multifunction devices, or MFDs. These are devices that can do scanning, faxing, printing. It's all in one. It's in a nice little compact package. You can put it on your desk. Looks like a mini fridge. And you can do all sorts of stuff with it. You can either receive faxes, you can scan documents in, or you can make copies or print out whatever you wish to do. Big game changers, so people didn't have to have multiple types of technology. It was all in one, relatively inexpensive. Yes, Crystal.
Hello. So I have one of these fabulous devices, and I'm going to pick it up Thanksgiving, but I wanted to know two things in regards to this, kind of sort of, one's a little bit off topic, but in order for me to be able to use the fax function, what kind of phone line will I need to contact FiOS to have them install the phone line to use the fax function?
Not necessarily. You can do digital fax through your computer.
Right. Okay. Right.
So you
And
can
then-
utilize voice over IP and stuff like that, and
Right.
use your data lines. You don't have to necessarily install a phone line per se to utilize that function.
Okay. But the voice over IP, is that the same? Does it provide the same functionality as a landline?
Voice over IP, it can serve much of the same purpose. Very, very few companies or people will have a phone line actually still installed. Like, let's have a show of hands. Who still has a POTS line in their house?
I want to get one of those installed. That's what I was going to ask you about. How do you get one of those installed? Because when the lights go out, or if my like, I need a old school phone in case of emergency. That's what I want.
Because I actually have one in my house because of hurricanes, because power is delivered through the phone line. So yes. So that's exactly what you're talking about. Even if the power goes out, you still have a connection to the outside world if you need it. So yeah, some people still have it.
What kind of phone line is that called?
It's POTS. It's a plain old telephone service. So even through, you know, whoever your cable provider is, Xfinity or AT&T or whatever, whoever's in your area, they still install old phone lines, and would be able to install it for you if you needed it. Or they, you know, they may be able to do it through your, if you have Ethernet coming into it, they may be able to do it through that as well, because that has similar properties.
Okay, thank you.
But in any case, so no problem there. Wonderful things. These are big, bulky, box-like devices. You usually will have a printer tray up top. The upper lid will lift up like the old school Xerox or copier machines, and have a flat lid in there where you can lay a document down on that and scan it or copy it if you so choose. You could even feed a document with multiple pages down through the top, so you don't have to scan one page at a time, because none of us wants to go back to that point in life. And they have what's called an ADF, or automatic document feed. Most larger printers have something like this. And they have networking capabilities, which is awesome. So they can, some of them you can actually email documents to the printer and it'll print it out for you. SMB, or server message block, utilizes that. It can also use cloud, do cloud printing and stuff like that. So you can print remotely from somewhere else. Nice features added on, great functionality. Made life a little bit easier though. If you do not have a need for a printer, scanner, copier, you may go for something a little less, that takes up a little bit less real estate, because these devices can be a little bulky on a desk. Questions so far? All right. It's 3:10. I'm going to pause the recording right here. We've been talking for a while. If I can. So it's not bad enough that we have to talk about physical printers. We got to talk about virtual ones as well. See, maybe you're asking yourself, what the heck is a virtual printer and why? Well, essentially, you're not really printing at all, but it allows you to produce a PDF document from a regular, you know, text document. If you want to give somebody a resume or something like that, typically you don't give them the actual, you know, text document or Word document. You don't give them an editable form. You would give them a PDF version. So you could take your document, print to PDF, and it converts it to the new format for you. You can turn it over and then hand it over to somebody. It makes it a lot easier. The other thing is you can print to file. So it basically produces a print file, which is going to be a little bit less with regards to storage space. And it's something that can be printed later without access to the program that created it. So if you create a Word document at home, but you don't have Word at the office, you could still print that file from there. Print to XPS, not used as much, but it is a standardized open format, and it's the answer, Microsoft's answer to print to PDF. So this is something that you can use in Windows, and you can also print to an image, which will generate a file like a BMP, a GIF, TIFF, JPEG, or PNG type file for yourself. So basically it's not really printing, but it's essentially creating a file that can be printed later if you so choose. Question on virtual printers. Pretty straightforward on these. Of all the printers, we don't have to memorize any parts or any of that stuff. It's just way to print when you don't have a printer on hand.
Kelly,
All right.
question.
Yes.
Is that like when you want to print, sometimes you go to print and then instead of setting it to print, you change the format to save as PDF and then you set
Yes.
it and then you can...
That is pretty much exactly what it is. Yes, Nissim.
I want to say that visual printing is part of Windows. As far as I know, there is a function. When it comes to printing, you can choose to print to a file or PDF format. And
Yes, it is. I mean, it is also in Mac. They do the same thing. XPS, Print XPS was like a Windows specific one for a while. But yeah, they do give the options: print to file, print to PDF, print to image. So they give you kind of a variety in case you don't have a printer hooked up at that moment.
Linux has such a thing?
I believe they do as well, yes.
Right, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, a way to print without having a printer?
If you don't have a printer, it's a virtual printer.
Yes.
Yeah. So, a way to print without actually having a printer.
So that just changes the type of file it is pretty much?
Yeah, to a degree.
Okay.
You know, or if you have an online document, like when you complete your test, you can print to PDF when you get your results of your exam so that you can go back over it later and look over the questions and what you got right, what you got wrong, all that kind of stuff. So if it's something like, say, you would only have access to it once, it may let you print to PDF so that you can actually still have the document. Oh, excuse me. All right. No promises, Francis. No promises. I'm kidding. I don't think we get into that. Thank you. Appreciate that, Eric. All right. Printing languages. Do you need to memorize these? Not really. Just kind of understand the kind of evolution of them. They started out initially printing in ASCII. Do we remember what ASCII was? Right off the bat?
The binary chart.
Yes, absolutely. That is the binary chart. It was the early version of it that gave you like 128 different characters. So early printers used ASCII for simple text. And then it kind of evolved over time. You got the PostScript, PCL, then GDI, and then XML. So it kind of has evolved over time. Just, do you need to be thoroughly knowledgeable about all the printing languages? No, you don't. But you may get a question on them just to kind of know if you see GDI, XML, PCL, that those are printing languages, or PostScript, PS, that those are printing languages. So if you see that acronym in something else, you can eliminate it. That's the biggest thing with it. All right. Printer properties when you go in, which is pretty common across all printers, probably with the exception of 3D printers. Adjust page orientation. You typically have two orientations. You have landscape, where it's going horizontally, and then you have portrait, which the page goes through vertically. Normally, we print things out in portrait, but sometimes if you're doing things like Excel and stuff like that, you may, or pictures, you would print out in landscape, which is just, it's sitting on its side. Resolution. How crisp do you need that image to be? So if you're printing out documents, you may not care too much about resolution, especially if it's just kind of a draft or something that you're keeping for yourself. So you may use a draft option so that you use less ink. So it won't be as crisp. You won't have that really, really dark, crisp black color in your text. It may just be a little closer to gray. But again, you're using about half to a third of the ink. So it's worthwhile in the long run. So resolution would play into that. The more resolution, typically the more ink you're using, and it's also going to be the printer's ability to create that crisp of an image. Better the resolution, probably the more expensive the printer you're using. Collation. Does anybody know what collating is? Like if I'm printing a document like with 10 pages and I say I want it collated.
I do. This is Crystal.
All right, Crystal.
That means, so when you want it collated, that means you want it printed page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Non-collated means that if you're printing 5 copies, you print 5 page 1s, then 5 page 2, then 5 page 3, etc.
That is a perfect explanation. Thank you so much, Crystal. So collation, it prints out each document individually. So page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, instead of going page 1, page 1, page 1, page 1, page 2, page 2, page 2, page 2, page 3, page 3, page 3, and then you have to sort it later. No, you just go in, you click collate, does it all for you. And then you just got to break up each individual document. Saves time. Paper size, types, and sources, especially if you're using something like LaserJet, you want to make sure that you're not using standard paper if you're printing out legal documents, because they like to use funny sized papers that are significantly longer. So, and then which tray is it located in? Because some printers may have 5, 6, 7 trays attached to them. You may have multiple trays with the same type of paper in, and you just have it prioritized. You use print from tray 1 until tray 1's empty, then move to tray 5. But you need to make sure that you have that correctly notated in the doc or in the printer for calibration. All right, duplex printing. Who remembers what duplex is? So we know what collating is. What's duplexing?
Both
Printing
sides.
on both sides.
Both sides of the paper. Oh man. So now we know duplexing. So if you say you want it collated and duplex, it's printing on both sides of the paper and prints the entire document in one shot. It's already broken out for you, makes life a lot easier for us. And we save paper. And then there is printing a test page. You will hear this stated ad nauseum over and over and over again. If you're having an issue with the printer, one of the first things they tell you to do, print a test page. So you can see if the color's off, if it's printing gibberish, if it's, doing anything out of the ordinary in the printing process, the test page can give you kind of an idea what's going on. And then when you're done, you print another test page because we want to verify functionality, right? It's part of our troubleshooting process. So test pages are very important, especially in the diagnostic process and verifying that we fixed the problem that we were sent there to fix.
You don't input you don't input a file for that. The machine does it. The printer does it automatically by itself.
Yeah, most of them have a test page that they'll use, and then what it'll do is it'll print a spectrum of colors. It'll print some words, and it's just like a quick little one-page document that kind of hits all the marks so that you can look and make sure that the printer's printing out appropriately. There's no gaps in the print. There's no like you're getting magenta, yellow, and black, but not cyan. So you make sure all your colors are there, all that kind of fun stuff. So printing a test page kind of gives you all that information. It's pretty nice. It'll tell you if your drivers are correct, because if your drivers aren't correct, it's going to print out garbage or gibberish. So it's just going to be a bunch of random symbols. Means your driver's not up to date. So you can get a lot of information from a test page.
And mostly if you're installing a new printer, it will always ask you to send out a test print right after the installation.
Thank you for choosing HP printers. Would you like to print a test page?
Test print, there you go.
All right. Connecting, installing. We have a couple different ways we can attach a printer. We can either do it old school direct way, USB. And in the older printers, it was an old USB type B connector. And then we got up to the USB type B 3.0, which is that light blue color. And then some of them will use a USB type C. Older printers will use the old serial port connectors, which is like the DB25. Although I don't think the 1100 actually will ask you about that, but just in case, it's an old serial port is how we would hook up a printer. Is a very wide thing, look like a VGA port, but like twice as thick or twice as long. You put it in, some of them had clips, some of them would screw in. That would be your direct connection. The parallel port. Some use Wi-Fi, like you can hook it up to a network, connect to it through Wi-Fi, and print to it that way. Some use what's called WPS. We have not gotten to this yet, But if you have this turned on any device in your house, deactivate it. This is probably one of the biggest backdoors or open security issues with almost any device. Yeah, it's really convenient, but it's so convenient that it's easily bypassed. So WPS features, if you have them turned on, turn them off. We'll get into doing that. And unfortunately, if you have a standard router from, say, Comcast or Xfinity, Verizon, whatnot, likely it has a WPS feature turned on. We'll get into how you need to go in there and turn that off a little bit later. You always look worried when I start talking about security, Brianna. So you're going to get really excited when we get into the security section. It's really good.
I am. It's just whenever my Wi-Fi acts up, the first thing I do is press that WPS button because it just seems to work.
It's easy, right? You just press it, everything hooks up.
I didn't know it was a backdoor to.
Did you know that if you have the proper algorithms, you don't even need to press the button? So somebody can actually
I don't know that,
literally get past it without pressing the button. I'm just giving you a hard time. So the other thing that we would do, so WPS, some printers have it. Yes, it's convenient. I usually recommend turning it off, although the A+ considers it a wonderful, convenient technology. The other thing we can do is do network printing. So you can either go through the Wi-Fi, hook it up to your Wi-Fi access, network the printer that way. You can also go through internet, like you can actually hook up an RJ45 connection to it and communicate with it that way. When we get into networking, we'll talk a little bit more about printers because we tend to treat them kind of special with regards to our networks, where everybody will have leased IP addresses with the exception of printers. They'll have something called static IPs that we reserve for them. But again, we'll talk about that later. Most local printers, like if they're going to be something that you're going to hook up to directly, it's plug and play. They have pretty much universal basic drivers installed. So if you have like an HP 5327, somewhere in your driver files, there'll be like HP 5300 series or 5000 series, and that'll give you basic communication with the printer. You can talk to it, get basic communication set up. The printer will say, nope, I'm a 5327, and then your system can go out and download drivers and get full functionality out of it. But you at least have basic drivers kind of built in right off the bat. Typically 32-bit drivers for 32-bit OSs, 64 for 64-bit OSs. Pretty standard, they just kind of match up. Connecting and installing, basic local steps, plug it in. You should see it show up in your devices. Go ahead, turn on the printer, install the drivers, launch the printer setup program, because some of them will come with one that will pre-launch for you. Follow the directions. Kind of go from there. Or if you're using the installation process for Windows, you open up printers, faxes window, add a printer, you find it. If it's directly connected, it'll see it right off the bat. You can follow the add printer wizard directions if you wish. Go ahead, get it set up, and you can set it to your primary printer if you wish. If it's a network printer, you can actually go and it'll tell you what visible printers are on your network. And you can look and see the one that you need to hook up with, and then you can connect with that one and set it as your primary printer as well. Questions so far? There's only 30 more slides. It's riveting stuff. All right, print servers. It's basically hardware or software that manages print jobs to one or more printers on a network. Print servers can be essentially on the printer itself. So they may have a built-in print server on the more modern ones. Older ones, you can actually use, and I've seen offices where they did this, another computer as the print server. So you would have like a standard desk jet printer, and then they would have just a random computer hooked up to it and plugged into it. And then they would share that printer with the network, and the computer would become the print server for the printer. So in this sense, it could be a dedicated hardware device with software installed on it, or it can actually be the printer itself. Most printers nowadays have an embedded print server on them. So use this server to manage print jobs. You can view the status, job history, see how much stuff's been printed, check the counters to see like how long until we have to do maintenance checks, all that kind of fun stuff. If like somebody sent something that wasn't properly formatted and it gets hung up in the printer, it allows you to clear the printer spool so that everybody can reprint their documents. Unfortunately, people don't usually check this. They just keep sending the same document 20 times to the printer. So you have to clear the whole spool, because if you just free up that one document, 20 versions of the same document will get printed out. It does happen. So it's generally better practice to just clear the print spool and let everybody know you need to resubmit your jobs. All right. You can also prioritize jobs. They do this a lot in schools, especially. So like you may schedule jobs, like, or, submit jobs for printing. And if there's like 50 people lined up, in queue for the printer, but say marketing needs to print out material that has to, get out to customers right away, they would be able to skip the line and go to the front and get their stuff printed first. So you can actually set up priority levels with regards to printers, kind of like quality of service with internet use, but we'll get into that one too a little bit later. All right. Sharing a printer, if you want to share yours, if you have it hooked up directly, you can go into that printer, right click on it, and you can click share this printer, make it visible on the network, and then other people would be able to see that printer and send print jobs essentially through your computer to that printer. It's pretty quick and easy for the most part. Questions so far? We just kind of went over this one. All right, printer queue. If something gets hung up, usually when you print something, you'll get that little print icon in the bottom right-hand side of your screen in the notification area. You can click on that, or double click on it, and it'll bring up the printer queue, and it'll show you all the jobs that are spooled in there. So if you have like 60 people trying to print at any given time, it'll be a long list of items that need to be printed, and it'll tell you if they're processing, if they're waiting, or if they got hung up. And you can end an individual one, or you can clear out the whole queue. Or if there's somebody who's got 500 pages they need to print, and you just need one page printed for like an email or something like that that's important so you can get done, you can pause their print yours, and then resume theirs. So that's another function you can do. And then you can cancel individual print jobs or all of them. That is the printer queue or spooler. All right, so print device connectivity, when you're hooking up like a big laser jet or something like that, and you're putting it over the network, if it's an RJ45, you can actually go into the settings, check and see what your IP address is right here on the network. And then when you go looking for a network printer, if you're not able to physically see it, like if it's not visible on your network when you're looking for one, you can input that printer, and it should be able to connect to it at that point. And then also you can update the SSID or service set identifier so that you know exactly what the printer is. So like I was saying before, you don't want to have like HP 257342875 and then have that kind of numbering system for all of your printers across the entire country, because people will be hooking up to printers 6 states away thinking that they're talking to the one that's 3 feet from them. You want to be able to identify it by location, so it's in the Jacksonville office, 3rd floor HR. quickly lets you know exactly where that printer is located. It's easy to point out in a list versus a long string of numbers. All right. Routine maintenance. We have talked a lot about this, but you want to make sure they're dust and debris free. The less gunk gets in that printer, much like your keyboards and all that stuff, the longer it's going to last, the better it's going to work. Use the manufacturer's directions for whatever printer you have. Follow the printed documentation. You can use a lightly damp cloth on the outside if you wish, dry cloth on the inside. Never use harsh chemicals because that can damage the components internally. Do not use compressed air either, because if you're blowing dust and debris off, typically what's going to happen is you're going to be blowing the dust and debris further into the printer, which is just going to lead to more problems, more paper jams, significantly more issues. So do not use compressed air to clean a printer. Only use safe tools, like if you're working on a laser jet, toner certified vacuum cleaners, extension magnets and brushes to clean up toner, stuff like that, because otherwise it doesn't clean up, it just smears. And that's no fun for anybody. Inkjets tend to have a cleaning program installed on them, so do some other printers. And that's, where we talked about where the carriage would slide over to where that sponge is, and then kind of go back and forth across the sponge to clean out the nozzles so that any dried or coagulated ink can get cleaned off so that you have cleaner printing. And then, depending on the type of printer, they may have different types of maintenance kits that you can get on a regular basis, and they generally will come with pretty clear instructions on cleaning and installing the updated pieces like pickup rollers and stuff like that, or sponges for laser jets, things like that. Questions, comments, concerns? Have we learned way more about printers than we ever thought we wanted to?
Definitely.
Are we on board with the paperless movement now?
Definitely.
All right. My job is done. All right. So overarching problems and solutions. So when problems arise, generally document what's going on, obviously, so that if somebody comes behind you, if it's a new problem, they know how to address it. Start with the least invasive solutions first. Do not jump to the king method. You can also use online support, where they usually have frequently asked questions, common issues, stuff like that. You can go to the manufacturer's website, update the device drivers. If you're looking for replacement parts, they'll tell you where to find them. Sometimes you may not know what the name of the part is. It's like it's a plastic widget. It looks like a cone. What is it? So you can go on there and look at the parts list, and it'll tell you exactly what you need to order. You can either get it from them or from a third party. And sometimes they may offer additional software, which may gain you additional functionality with the printer. All right. First, you have problems with the printer. First thing, verify the printer is on. I know it seems silly. I know people get agitated when they say, is it on? Is it plugged in? But unfortunately, there are many times where this is the issue. Print a test page. The test page does not print at all. Start troubleshooting in Windows to see if you can locate the issue. Maybe try printing from another computer, see if it's your computer or if it's every computer. So that tells you if it's your system you got to be working on or the printer itself. Larger printers have internal RAM built into them. Sometimes if too many jobs go into it at one time, it can overrun the RAM and drastically slow down the performance of the printer. So in some of these larger printers, you can add additional RAM, much like a computer, give you a lot more flexibility and functionality. If you're in graphics design, that is usually something they want to do because graphics designers tend to have millions of different fonts that they pull from to create their signs and images and promotional material. These images, these fonts take up a lot of memory. So you want to make sure that the RAM is capable of handling it. You can install more and typically will help free it up. All right. Other things you want to check if you're having printer issues. Make sure the printer that they're actually trying to print to is their default. Unfortunately, this happens quite often. Somebody goes on a trip, somebody goes home, somebody goes to a different office, somebody is new to this office or division or department, and they're defaulted to another printer somewhere else. So make sure it's communicating with the proper printer. Check the printer's IP address. This is a network printer. You should have the ability to do that on that little screen. It should tell you what its IP address is. Make sure that your computer is talking to the appropriate IP address. And you should be able to see this in the properties of the printer. Verify the printer is online. Is it plugged in? Can you ping the printer? You have its IP address. Can you get in there, go into your command line and ping the printer and then have it respond? Is it online and able to communicate? Next, reboot your computer. See if that does it. Uninstall and reinstall the printer. After this, that should solve 90-something% of your issues. Then you can start getting into some diagnostic utilities and software if you need to. Questions? All right. Similar instructions with regards to shared printers as well. Yes, rebooting the printer can also work because it may have jobs hung up on it as well and not able to process them. So it clears out that cache memory and may get things going. All right. So problem solving strategies when you're printing from Windows applications. If the printer spool isn't moving, try erasing or clearing the queue and allowing people to resubmit print jobs. Again, verify correct printer. Double check your cable connections and remember cables have two sides. Make sure both are firmly connected. Stop and restart print spooler service. See if that helps. Delete the printer, reinstall. Update your drivers. Try to print to a file. See if it's your actual, software that's causing the problem. If you can print to a file, okay, it seems to be working okay. And then check your hard drive space. Make sure you have enough. Print in safe mode, which you won't have all the fancy graphics, but it'll at least tell you if you have basic communication with that printer. Almost done. All right, garbled characters on paper. If you hear garbled characters or you hear it's printing garbage, instantly your brain needs to go to drivers. It's printing random symbols. Instantly, your brain needs to go, okay, I need to update my drivers. Sometimes it may be a different application though. Is the USB secured correctly? Restarting the printer, like Francis just talked about. Update the drivers, which is usually the case. Or the printer might need servicing. Maybe it's got dirty rollers or problems going on there. Colors aren't coming out good. If you're printing photographs, photograph paper tends to be able to print on one side only. Make sure it's installed correctly. Try flipping the paper over and adjust the quality of the print. Maybe you're trying to print it too high resolution or printing it too low. Inkjets, try cleaning the cartridges just to make sure that you don't have dried ink or gooped up ink on the end of those print nozzles. Make sure they can go correctly. And then For a laser printer, try running a calibration cycle on it and see if that clears it up. We overwhelmed, underwhelmed, whelmed.
I feel a little overwhelmed just because, geez, that's a lot of info.
Thought printers was going to be a cakewalk, huh?
I actually did. I thought
thought
it
so
would be a
too,
lot easier.
Like, oh man, you got a light afternoon. We're going to talk about printers. Whew. This is the most complained about technical session of all of them. I don't, it is what it is. This is the one that is generally complained about the most. And when you get into test prep and stuff like that, oh, I can't stand printers. And then the problem is like some people, like Francis, came in already hating printers, and this is just going to bring it to a whole new level. I mean, this is going to be like, full blown, just internal issue.
It's
Not
tough.
gonna be able
We'll
to
get through
escape
it, but it's tough.
It's
Oh,
tough, yeah. All right. A lot of this stuff is repeated. Laser printers, poor print quality, unplug, allow to cool for 30 minutes, at least 30 minutes. Take the toner cartridge out, gently rock from side to side. Do not shake. You can use econo mode if you're running low on toner. It uses a lot less toner, but it'll extend the life of the toner. So say if you're on a regular order, like once a month for new toner, you have like 5 days till that toner is supposed to show up. Put it on econo mode, and it should get you a bit further. Paper quality may not be high enough. The laser printer is expecting you to have that nice, thick, heavy-weighted resume paper, and you're using standard office paper. So it's not going to work as good. Or the opposite could be true, where it's expecting office paper, and then you send resume paper through. And this is a big issue on laser printers. That means when it gets to the fusing aspect of the printer, the fuser will not get hot enough to actually melt that resin into the paper because it's expecting a much thinner paper. So when the image comes out, it'll smear, smudge, run, and it won't look good. So if it's not calibrated to the proper paper, that may become an issue. Printer might need cleaning. Happens. And then make sure you're not past due for routine maintenance. Sometimes the light drum goes bad if you have what's called ghosting, which ghosting essentially is you're seeing images from previous print jobs on your current paper. So if you printed the picture, of your office logo, and then for 20 pages after that, you see a faded image of the office logo, it means the photo drum is either going bad or it's not getting cleaned properly. The erasure lamp might not be turning on. So it's something in that area. All right. Debris, foreign material can create foreign images or create distorted images and heavily paper jams. All right. I would take a screenshot of this page just because it kind of gives you quick, easy problems and solutions. Blank pages, you're out of toner, ink, whatever. Try to print the diagnostic. If that doesn't work, if you put in new toner, doesn't work, and then check your power supply. Dirty printouts, fuser's not reaching the proper temperature. So if you're sending in thicker paper than it's used to, it's not going to be able to reach the optimal temperature, or the fuser could be going bad. And then we would call in a technician to change the fuser. Vertical lines, toner's clogged. Blotchy printing, which is an uneven dispersion of the toner, and that's where you would kind of rock the toner back and forth as well to kind of redistribute it, and so on and so on. Pretty straightforward. Multiple sheets, we talked about this earlier. Either you have a worn pickup roller or humidity is too high in your office. Printers and electronics tend to like 50% humidity. Not too low, not too high. We get screenshots. All right. Poor print quality for impact printers. Advance the ribbon, check and make sure it's still good. If not, replace it. Check your print head for dirt and debris, because again, impact printers are typically used in manufacturing, warehousing, and auto repair. And then the planten spacing, which is between the print head and the page, might be too far apart, so the impact is not fully touching the page, creating a more a lighter image. Inkjet, confirm your paper type, reinstall the cartridge, make sure it's got your ink levels are correct. Clean the nozzles, so running through a cleaning phase. And sometimes the sponge can get a little too dirty. You may need to clean the sponge itself. And since I don't want all y'all to feel neglected, we have a game. All right. Much to everybody's relief, we have now come to the end of this particular technical session. And we should now be able to compare and contrast different types of printers. What are the 5 different families of printers we have?
Impact, inkjet, thermal,
3D,
laser,
thermal.
3D.
and dot matrix. Or
What's
no,
impact?
That would be impact. So it's 3D.
So impact, thermal, 3D,
Inkjet.
Laser.
virtual, laser, inkjet. Well, virtual, I guess you could throw in there too.
Okay.
So I guess you could throw that in there, but that, you know, one of the main hardware families we talk about: inkjet, thermal, laser, impact, and 3D printing. We should also be able to identify common steps for installing printers. Most of them are plug and play. Some of them you have to go through the network and follow the Windows install printer wizard. Identify some of those common pitfalls and how to get around them, and identify some common problems and how to take care of those. Questions, comments, concerns, complaints, revelations. I'm sure there's a lot of complaints out there right now. All right. So